We are so fortunate tonight to be having a conversation with four individuals whose unique stories really define what it means to grow up and out of poverty. Each of them will give you their elevator speech of their story, and then we will launch into our conversation. First, we'll hear from Derek Anderson, an NCAA, Olympic, and NBA champion. Derek was raised in public housing, abandoned by both parents at age 11. He spent 3 years as a homeless youth, became a father at age 14, and went on to graduate from the University of Kentucky. Derek is the founder of Stamina, a not-for-profit organization devoted to assisting women and children. Derek?
Good day, everybody. My name is Derek Anderson, and my journey starts off in Louisville, Kentucky. At the age of 11, I grew up just streets away from Muhammad Ali, and I find myself walking home and get to our apartment, and it was an empty apartment. My dad had left when I was 10, and my mother, who was struggling with her addiction with alcohol, she just left me in an empty apartment in our project housing. And at the age of 11, all I knew was to just take care of myself because of the situation I'd been in before. And to not see either one of my parents for the next 20 years, I had to find some kind of method and surviving on my own. And what I did was find out that my personality was all I needed, and my kindness is what made me survive. I found myself working at Winn-Dixie. A lot of people who may be on this call remember that place. And I found myself working and asking people just to carry their bags for 5 or 10 cents. It's 1984, and I was just walking around carrying people's bags. I saved up my first $3. I thought about going to Kentucky Fried Chicken and getting a 2-piece meal. And then I thought about if my parents never came home that day, what would I do? So I went back to the grocery store. I got a loaf of bread. I got bologna, and I had change left over. I didn't have a college degree, but I had a survival degree. And for me, I never wanted to get in trouble. I never wanted to do things that was putting me in jeopardy of being in my parents' situation. And for me, I did that, and I go home, and my parents, and again, I don't see either one of them for 20 years. And I stayed in other people's homes. I slept in other people's clothes, wore other people's shoes, but I always found a way of surviving because I was kind and I was polite. Again, didn't have a college degree, but I knew how to treat people. I was a respectful young man. I never drank, never smoked. I never sold drugs, never did anything wrong, never been arrested. And what I found myself doing is just being nice to people, and people were nice to me. And I able to stay with the high school coach, and I dated his daughter, and I was 14 years old, and she got pregnant at 15. She was arrested for shoplifting. I was a single dad for the next 2 years, but again, I found myself working out 2 jobs and just found my way of being positive and staying positive and doing the right things. And at 18, I graduated 3.7 class president and got a scholarship to Ohio State University. And I just found myself doing the right things and being kind is the way you survive in life. And that's why I wrote my book, Stamina, is to make sure that I showed other people a way of making it without going down a dark, deep hole, and you can find your way on doing the right things. And that's my story, and I think it's something I wanted to share with the world so everyone knows that they can make it too.
Thanks, Derek. Dr. Mary Badillo is an assistant professor of ER medicine at Montefiore Medical Center. Dr. Mary was raised in public housing in the Bronx with 5 siblings who all became medical or other professionals. She was recently profiled in the CBS documentary, Bravery and Hope, 7 Days on the Front Line, a major force battling COVID-19. Dr. Mary, would you share your story with us?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Badillo, and I'm a board-certified emergency medicine physician at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. I attribute my accomplishments to my parents. My parents came here from Puerto Rico in 1952 with the American dream. My father was very limited. He was a weekend warrior drinker. He worked in a factory, and my mom was a housewife. She suffered from multiple sclerosis, so she was a handicapped woman. And yet, in spite, she was able to raise 6 professional children. And I share the story of my brothers because they're part of my story. My oldest brother, Gilbert, served as a supervising judge of the New York City Housing Court of Queens County. My second brother, Robert, has a PhD in philosophy. He was ordained by John Cardinal O'Connor in St. Patrick's Cathedral. And he's the superior provincial of the United States for his order, Misioneros Identes. My third oldest brother, Arthur, is a physician, and he's in private practice in the underserved community of Newark, New Jersey. My fourth oldest brother, Richard, is the Deputy Commissioner of Fiscal and Business Management and the Chief Financial Officer for a New York City agency. Francis is a retired NYPD officer, and he completed his master's in criminal justice and pursued a second vocation as a teacher at Cardinal Hayes High School in the Bronx. My brothers were my role models and my mentors. When I was 7 years old, I wrote an essay that I wanted to become a doctor because I saw how they pursued their careers. I was set on an educational track to emulate them. We were raised in the South Bronx, right by Yankee Stadium, and at the age of 6, my brother inspired my father to move the family to the north part of the Bronx because my father got jumped on his way home from the 4 train to Anderson Avenue. I remember that day vividly how scared I was that something happened to my father, and he came home and his face was black and blue and he had blood running down his cheek. My brother's move was pivotal, but I had no idea at that age how important that was. He moved us to the north part of the Bronx, and you know, it was a safer neighborhood. I personally never experienced violence or drugs in my building. The building was clean, the elevator was safe, and I was never afraid to come home from a late night shift in the supermarket. Our limited household income was supplemented by a financial assistance, food stamps, welfare, Medicaid, and that allowed my parents to make ends meet and provide a safe shelter. I attribute my success really to my mother, Savis Mendez, who intuitively knew that the secret out of poverty was an education. She taught me how to ask for help. You know, I remember her going to the grammar school and saying, I have no money, but I want my children in this Catholic school. She gave me the greatest gift of all, which was faith in God. My passion is ballroom salsa dancing, and I also love to entertain my friends and family in my home. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wes Moore is the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation. Wes was raised in subsidized housing in Baltimore, went on to become an Oxford University Rhodes Scholar and a White House Fellow to the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, and a best-selling author of The Other Wes Moore. His latest book, 5 Days, The Fiery Reckoning of an American City, covers the 2015 slaying of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. Wes, could you please tell us your story?
Such an honor to be with all of you. And honestly, it's a true honor to be on this panel with people that I admire and respect and look up to in many ways. And, you know, I come to this gathering with a firm belief and understanding and with an undying foundation on the fact that housing is a human right. And you cannot talk about any forms of true mobility, economic mobility, educational mobility, lifelong learning, employment and career attainment if you do not understand the role that housing plays in that. And you do not understand the detrimental role in accomplishing any of those other things unless you can put that in place. You know, every single juncture and turn in my life, it was the role of not just the home, but what it represented that helped to shape my destiny. You know, I only have 2 memories of my father. And the first memory was when I was about 4 years old, and my mother had a bunch of rules in her house. But one of her big rules was that men do not put their hands on women. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized the reason that she was so insistent on that rule was because of her own past. And as a survivor, she always said, I will never tolerate seeing that if I see it, and I definitely won't tolerate it if I see it in my son. And when she'd see me fighting my older sister, I have an older sister who's about 6 years older than me, and I have a younger sister who's about 14 months younger. And whenever I'd fight my older sister, my mother would break us up because it was always my fault. No matter what was going on, she would tell me, you do not put your hands on women. You do not put your hands on women. And I remember one time when I was fighting my older sister and my mother was coming after me. And I was terrified. She was sprinting after me. I'm running in the other direction. And my father was actually the one who helped to come and save me because he kind of intervened and he sat me down and it kind of explained to me what I'd done so wrong. Well, my job is to protect my family, not to go after them, protect women, not to hit them. And he told me I had to go apologize to my mother and to my sister, but he would come with me. And I remember the thing I remember most was actually holding on to his hand as we went to go apologize. And the only other memory I have of him was about 6 months later when he died in front of me. And my mother had a really difficult time with the transition. She now was a woman a widow in her 20s with 3 children that she was going to raise on her own. She was not prepared, nor this was not the life that she dreamed of. And one day she called up her parents, my grandparents, who lived up actually in the South Bronx. My grandmother was a school teacher in the South Bronx for 25 years. My grandfather was a minister of a small church. The reason that is important and really relevant to here is that their house was barely big enough for them. But when my mother called, they figured out a way to make it big enough for all of us. When people say that poverty is a choice, I agree. But it's not the choice of the individual who's living under the weight of poverty. It's society's choice. And one of the reasons why I think today this conversation and this work as a whole is so important is because we can choose whether or not people have to live and experience and understand this scourge of poverty where luck or an ability to call somebody or whatever the case might be can make all the difference despite our challenges or not. And that's why I'm very humbled to be here today.
Thanks, Wes. That was really powerful. And last, Liz Murray is an inspirational speaker and author. Bronx born to addicted parents who died in her teens, Liz spent time homeless and then attended Harvard on a scholarship. The film, Homeless to Harvard, is based on her best-selling memoir. She is the founder and executive director of the Arthur Project, working to end generational poverty through relationship-based learning. Liz, will you bring us home with your story?
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for having me here. Gosh, I'm in so much admiration of the people on this panel and really happy to see the Bronx so well represented, I have to say. I'm born and raised in the Bronx, and I come to you today with a personal story and also professional experience in lifting kids up out of poverty. So I grew up in the Bronx with parents who were very loving, but they were deeply, profoundly addicted to drugs. I was born with heroin in my system, and my father was in prison. And I grew up in an area where we had so much beauty and so many beautiful connections as a community. But in so many ways, we had challenges that would shape so many of our lives. I lost my family very early. My parents, their addiction led them to contract HIV before they had access to many of the medications that are available now. And like many youth who grow up underserved, I found myself really in desperate need of really smart interventions and people who would invest in me in care. And I ended up getting lucky enough to have neighbors invest in me, one neighbor in particular by the name of Arthur, a mentor that came to me later in life. But, you know, when I guess I should have been picking out my prom dress and studying SATs, right? But I found myself at this age where I had dropped out of school, was sleeping on the streets, and I buried my mother just after I turned 16. And I was really in a dire moment of kind of going in one direction or the other. And I had the luck of finding a school where a mentor invested in me, and I worked very hard, and I decided to go to school while I was homeless. So I was sleeping on the streets in New York City. And I don't know, I just had this kind of fire in my belly and said, I have to get this done, and I have to get it done perfectly. And I got straight A's, and I wrote an essay to the New York Times to get a scholarship, which I was lucky enough to win. And then my life story was put out there in the New York Times and actually in a movie, and I was able to write a book about my experiences. But one thing I will say is that there are pieces of these kinds of stories that never quite feel right for me. The rags to riches, the before and after, this sense of being a bootstrapper. I don't believe in bootstrappers. I believe no one gets where they're going alone. And when we speak about transformation as though it's an individual affair, and we leave out systems and society and what kind of policies need to be put in place to really align housing with education and a number of other things, we overlook our ability to be effective and to change the lives of one another. So I went on to co-found, and I helped to run an organization based in the Bronx called the Arthur Project. And we bring mentors to middle school students. I named it after a mentor who made a difference for me. And it's really my dream going forward to pass on that impact to others. And I will say, you know, something, Wes, that you said really resonated with me. Housing is a human right. And the more that we can connect the dots between how housing and housing insecurity and all the policies and societal structures that lead to so much housing instability, if we can connect that to education and really close some of those gaps, we will be able to transform the lives of young people. And the last thing I'll say is that my deepest passion inside of all of that is the power of relationship. Today, I'm excited to share with you at some point how I believe being effective at relationships and really understanding the science of relationship and how to create safe spaces for youth is critical to all the processes to lift people up out of poverty. Thank you for having me here today.
Thanks so much, everybody. Those are truly powerful stories and really amazing experiences. And it's an honor to be here on this panel as well. Liz, I'd actually like to start with that point. How can strong relationship skills make educators and others who care about young people more effective in supporting youth who are struggling with housing instability?
Sure. I mean, thank you for picking up that thread right there. So one thing that when it comes to identifying youth who are dealing with issues of housing instability, a big piece of that is how do you create the safety in the relationships so that young people feel free to disclose? And I know that, so speaking from personal experience, you do know what it feels like to be, if you're a homeless youth, and I was, you do know what it feels like to walk down the hallway and have a general sense that help might be somewhere. And you might even see posters on the wall that say, come to my office, speak to me, it's confidential. But what you don't understand is how much power you will give away depending on what you disclose. And really walking into a room with an adult, it's so important to be able to read the signs and signals for youth who are really activated and actually might look very calm and relaxed, but are in fact terrified, and how to kind of downregulate and bring that threat down so that youth can really build trust. So if there's a sense of trust, then there's so much space for intervention. But there's a piece inside of that goes with growing up in intergenerational poverty. So for instance, if I'm a child sitting on my parents' lap and we go to our face-to-face appointment, let's say it's, we used to say that at the welfare office, right? You go for your parents' caseworker appointment. Mm-hmm. I'm watching in that scenario, in schools and in numerous settings, I'm watching my parents sort of be chided and infantilized by authority figures. And you grow up watching your parents be mistreated and you internalize this sense of authority is dangerous. And if my parents don't have the right to sort of be a full adult with agency, then maybe I don't have a right. And you internalize then this fearful relationship with authority. And that can, and not to mention children are often coached to keep secrets. So don't tell that the parents are using drugs. I was told if they find out, you can be taken away. If you add all that up and you have a child dealing with housing insecurity, they're coming to you having this whole deck of information they may or may not share. It's going to be critical to support the adult in being able to get the signs and symptoms of when there's not only housing instability, but a sense of trust, and to pick up on those little attempts that a child might be making, testing whether or not you can safely disclose. So I think that if you can train the adults and how to spot that and create safe relationships, it will up the possibility of youth being able to reach out for help. And there's so much, we could go on for hours, but there's so much inside of that. I would say it's critical because I do believe that relationships and strong relationships are really some of the biggest touch points of safety for young people when they are engaging with these systems.
I saw a lot of nodding among the panelists. Is there anything anybody would want to add to that sort of conversation?
Well, for me was being in that situation, I found it very, very scary of telling people my truth because like she said, I knew even at that age that I would be sent away. And for me, staying in an empty apartment was better than going sent away because I saw some of my friends have that happen and I didn't see them again. So as a kid, you're like, oh my God, where'd they go? Like, you don't know where they're at. You don't know what happened to them. And as a kid, you're thinking fear. You're not thinking safety.
That's right.
So Liz is 100% right. As a kid, you don't see an adult as that. And for me I think if we can put in our school systems, like I've always said, if you paid me millions of dollars to play basketball, imagine if you put my taxes and that in the school system and you gave an after-school program for kids to talk to teachers. Now the teachers are prepared to talk to the student in a one-on-one basis. They can say, hey, tell me what you're doing. Tell me what would you do in life situations. A teacher can pick up on a kid who's in danger, who's in trouble. If you ask them what would they do at the age of 14 if their parents was gone and he had no money. In my neighborhood, most of them would say they would do something bad. Red flag, talk to the kid. But if you never talk to the kid, you don't know what the kid is thinking. So Liz is 100% right. Kids are not going to tell the truth about bad stuff at home. I heard Dr. Mary Jane talk about her dad coming home like she remembers that. But she's not going to tell someone that, hey, my dad got into a fight when she's a kid. Like, that's not something you just broadcast.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think in Wes as well, when he spoke about fighting his sister, he's not going to say he fought his sister as a kid on social media. He's not going to text and say, hey, I had a fight with my sister. That looks bad. So as a young person, we have to have adults who are able to have a relationship and a conversation with us, get us to speak. But if we're always thinking as an adult, as a child, we know how that goes. So I think it's up to the adult to be able to signify and to have a relationship with a young person to get them to feel comfortable, to get them to feel safe to tell their story, and to also reassure, I won't be taken away and I won't be put in a bad situation. That's a confidentiality that you, and I built that with a basketball coach. Granted, it was for wrong reasons. He was recruiting me. But I felt that he wouldn't take me away, and he didn't. And that's what you need to find. Some people who can have a relationship and can try to help you without being in fear.
And the only thing that at first I just say, I completely echo everything. But the reality is this, is that we have to understand we are speaking to our children and they are hearing us, even when we're not saying a word. When you look at the conditions and the places that we are asking people to exist in, where it's like you're speaking volumes by simply looking at the places we are asking our children to grow up in, the water we are asking them to drink, the air we are asking them to breathe, the schools we're asking them to attend, because they will assess their value based on that. And I remember once where I wrote this story called The Other Westmore, and it was really about a young man who grew up in similar areas, similar environments, around the same ages, similar circumstances. But when I was getting ready to head off to England on a full scholarship, I actually learned in the newspaper that was writing the same article about that I got the scholarship that there was a armed robbery, and in this botched jewelry store robbery that 4 people an off-duty police officer was killed in this botched jewelry store robbery, and the police were looking for 4 people, and the people they were looking for was a guy whose name was also Westmore. And it was really through that interaction that I reached out to him, got to know him. He's now in year 20 of his life sentence, and we've been good friends for 17 years. And I remember once having a conversation with him, and we were talking about Baltimore. And I asked him a question because I'd heard this expression so many times, I just kind of baked it in, where people say people are products of their environments, we're the products of environments. And he paused and he looked at me and he said, actually, I think we're products of our expectations. And as soon as he said that, I thought to myself, he is absolutely right. Now, we weren't products of our environments, we were products of our expectations. And someone once said to me, it's a real shame that you lived up to your expectations and Wes didn't. And I said, the real shame is we both did. We both lived up to exactly what other people thought, because the expectations that people have of themselves, they don't come from nowhere. The expectations that people have of themselves come from the expectations that other people have of them. And they internalize them and they make them their own. And so how we then take that and remind ourselves of that in terms of everything that we are placing in the path of our kids, understand we are speaking to them, oftentimes without saying a word, and they are hearing us loud and clear as to what exactly the expectations for them actually are.
And as for me, I feel that even the smart kid, I was the smart little girl that was really perfect, that was never got in trouble. And, but I hid under I got to get an A. I got to get an A, because if I get an A, I won't get in trouble. But on this, behind that, I got to get an A. And the good little girl, I hid the truth about what was going on at home. And, the truth of the matter was, my father would get drunk, and there's all the things that go along with an alcoholic parent in the home, from domestic violence to, not talking, no communication, fear, a lot of fear. As I can echo in the rest of the group, you kind of internalize that. And the only way I was able to handle it was to do something that I could control. And the only thing I could control was to get that A. And with my mother's guidance, you know, got to get out of poverty. You know, you don't want to live with roaches in the house anymore and water bugs. Then you want to get that A. You're kind of motivated. But yeah, you also got to look out not only for the kid that's struggling, but the kid that is actually doing good. So it's like tapping into all of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so. Can I just say, I hear a theme in all of that. What we're all sharing, just right. I mean, well, there's so many, but just even if you want to get out of here, right? It's some of that narrative and the sense of you might be taken away. It's almost as though so many of us grow up hearing about society, functional aspects of society is out there, and then there's a wall, and we're over here somehow. And how do we cross through to the other side, right? How do we become a part of things? And you know, I'm just going to say again, relationships, I think, are such a big key. But as a bridge and moving forward, I'm reminded of my wonderful and beautiful teacher who I had at Humanities Preparatory Academy in Manhattan. By being embraced by him and being taken in, as I just buried my mom, I was homeless. I came in off the streets. I think I looked like an alley cat when I walked into this man's office. I don't know. But some people, they just see right through to who you are. He encouraged me to be part of our community at our school. And by all those little touch points with him, slowly, I think what can happen for youth is you can start seeing to the other side of that wall, and you can start seeing yourself as belonging. I used to shoplift my food. I had no food. I'd steal from this particular supermarket that was very small in Chelsea near my high school. And I remember after being embraced by my teacher, something about walking in and him lighting up when I walked in the room and having those relationships. I walked into the supermarket one day to steal, as I always had. And I just sort of stopped and looked around at the human beings in there. I saw the manager, I saw everyone, and I took what I was going to take and I put it back. And I remember thinking, what was that about? And I think that relationships can be that bridge to where you go, wait a second, maybe it's not this big amorphous authority, foreign idea, society, right? But maybe actually I matter. And I'm having these exchanges that teach me that. And if I matter, maybe I don't want to like take, right? I want to contribute. And that transformation from wanting to take is about survival, right? And not belonging. But when you have that belonging, then you realize, wait a second, I'm part of this, everything that I see. And I want to contribute. And that's a night and day shift because you realize you matter, you want to contribute. And I do think that relationships can be that bridge.
So speaking of relationships, what are some of the ways that educators, counselors, teachers, principals, administrative staff, what are some of the ways the relationships with those education professionals had or can have an impact on your story?
Sure. Is that to all of us? I mean, I'll let someone else speak because I sure have an opinion, but I'm gonna let someone else speak.
No, start.
Sure. Should I? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll jump in. I think the first thing is we have to take relationships more seriously. And I mean that from a policy and systemic perspective. So if you think of an analogy in the business world, you would say 25, 30 years ago, if you used a word like leadership, right? People would think that's a soft skill. A person either sort of has it or they don't have it. And now we know how ridiculous that is. And we have institutes that train people in various aspects of leadership. And actually, by any measure, any company, organization without some like thoughtful, intentional approach to leadership, we don't know if we take them that seriously. I think we're on the precipice of seeing a transformation in relationships in that way. And I do believe that there are a number of institutes, and certainly at the Arthur Project, we are working on this. How do you, first of all, you have to identify the underlying assumptions. When you're putting adults together with youth in that dyad, you just assume that if the adult is proficient in, I don't know, the educational content they're meant to teach, that somehow that will all work out. I actually think we need to support our adults in, knowing what it is to have a baseline proficiency in relationship. That could be a number of things, like how do I foster trust? How do I look for signals where there's not a felt sense of safety? How do I really have reciprocity, and what's the importance of me being reliable? If you can support adults in understanding that, there are, a list of assets of healthy and developmental relationships that has to be adopted at the leadership level. That has to be adopted at the leadership level, and then that has to be implemented and placed as a value inside of a school. So I want to answer by saying what adults can do, but I also want to be fair and say that if you don't train the adults and implement it as a core value in your organization, then it's ad hoc. Then really, if it's not in your budget, is it in your values, right? So I would say that, and as a tip, right, ad hoc for adults who are interested, I would say look up the work of Stephen Porges, the Search Institute. There's a lot of information online, but the most important thing is to understand that it's not the content you want to teach that child that's the most important thing. Rather, the relationship is in itself, the serve and return between adult and youth, and the dance that goes with that is actually the intervention most of the time. And most learning is, in fact, a byproduct of a healthy relationship. So be reliable, be trustworthy, share power, and have mutual respect in that relationship, and look to create safety before you look to implement intervention.
For me, I wanted to join in real quick. Liz, you're 100% right. And it starts with the adults. And for us, as who we are, you realize one thing that teachers do not get to do is decompress. It's like the police. It's like the fire department. It's like every one of us who work daily for other people. When do we decompress? So for us is to teach the teachers to decompress in an environment that they can now be excited to help a kid. If we're all working 9 to 5, the last thing we're thinking about is mentoring somebody for the next 4 or 5 hours. We don't have a time for ourselves. So for our teachers is to find a way that I put in a program, it's called Program U, to teach the teachers. The first period you decompress. Second period is math. Third period is English. Fourth period you go to lunch. Fifth period you decompress with the students. So now everyone is just talking. Everyone is having a conversation. And what you do is you make it open forum for everyone. So you'll put 3 people here, tell them what they want to do in their life. The teacher gets to tell them what they wanted to do before they became a teacher. Now everyone is having relationship conversations. Now the teachers feels like I'm not being stressed about, hey, I got to talk to this kid about schoolwork. Now they can just actually be human beings. If you never give a teacher time to decompress, they're human too, and they're going to come into work some days and have that bad attitude. You ever walk in a room and you're like, and then all of a sudden everybody else is like that. Now that one person has changed the whole mood. So imagine you walk into a room and it's we walk into the room and say Andy's just like, oh, how you guys doing? Now everybody's like, oh, Andy's always in the mood. So now I'm so now that it creates an environment of negativity thinking. The environment is bad. I always walk in the room, like you said, just smile, laugh, speak to everybody. Right. Now that energy gets into you. Like when he got on the phone, he was just all energetic, and I was like, man, this cool dude. I don't even know Wes. But he's cool dude. His energy was there. I felt it. And, you know, you can gravitate to those things, but our teachers don't have the time to decompress. So again, Liz, you're 100% right. We all have to find a way of getting our school teachers, our leaders, even like I said, to the police. Imagine if you gave the police a vacation for 30 days. Yeah. Just a free paid vacation for 30 days. They'll come back the next 3 or 4 months like, hey, I had a great vacation. I'm ready to go back. My energy's here. He's not stressed as much. Fire departments, city officials, give them a vacation. Give normal people vacations. You know, we can do the time to decompress as an adult. Now it's easy for us to see a signal because we're being energetic to that child or to a young person. And again, with Dr. McJane, she was doing great with school, but we never knew anything was wrong because we never had a relationship or a conversation with her. She could have told us some stuff if we would have known. She's the straight A student flying past, and then she's got more stress than everybody in the room.
Right.
But you
wouldn't know it, but you wouldn't know it.
Right.
So let's decompress the leaders, and then we can have a normal conversation with human beings and forget your titles. Let's have a normal conversation at every level and watch the difference that you make, because everyone will feel trusted because everyone realizes we're all humans no matter what you do.
And I agree with you, Derek, because we have a program at the hospital. It's called Mentoring in Medicine, where minority students, we grab them from high school through college, and usually we set them on the track to how to apply and work through your process of becoming a physician. And I mentor a couple of the students. They actually hang out with me side by side in the ER, and we see patients together, we rap together, what's going on. And I keep it, like you said, light. I tell them where I failed, because I think part of it is showing students and young people your own vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. And when they see that you're vulnerable enough to say, look, I took a course And I wasn't able to manage all the workload. And I had to go to med school, summer school, which stunk. They're like, oh, wow, you can fail and still become a doctor? I always tell them, look, you're allowed to fail. You just can't quit, you know?
Wow.
They can see like, oh, wow, she made it. So a lot of it is just becoming truly vulnerable and telling the students exactly what happened to you so that they can identify and then make the leap of faith to say, wow, if she did it or he did it, then I could do it. But that vulnerability is key in forming that trust and that foundation. And also, like you said, keeping it light and fun. I'm like, come on, let's go rap with this guy. What do you think? What do you think is going on with him? You think he's sick? You think he's bullshit? You know, what are we going to do with this person? Are we going to admit him? Is he really telling the truth? And I engaged them, and I'm like, what do you think? This is common sense. Come on, you don't got to go to med school to know this. And they get involved, and, you know, and I make it fun with them, you know.
That's beautiful. Can I just thank you for being who you are in the world? Gosh, so many of us could have used someone just like this, like you, like the example that you're sharing. That's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's true. And I think, and the thing to even, you know, also just to, you know, reinforce all the points is that I think we also have to remind all of our teachers, instructors, mentors, etc., remind them of their own power.
Yes.
You know, it's like you have the chance every single morning to change the world. And oftentimes we have people who can feel so beaten down by world occurrences and current events. And is this really making a difference? But I think one of the threads that you see with everybody here, and frankly, I think for everybody who's even listening, is some of the most impactful people that we've had in our life were not people with big titles. We're not people in big positions. We're not people who did all this stuff. It was the coach. It was the minister. It was your fifth grade teacher who was the first person ever told me that I was smart. It's like people who ended up changing your entire mindset.
Yeah.
By being who they were.
Right.
That they changed not just a life, but they then changed the lives that every other life that life was going to impact. And so I think sometimes we have to remind people, it's like, yo, you are the embodiment of power. You are the embodiment of influence.
Correct.
You have a chance to get up every single morning and do something that all people wish they could do, which is go and work your day. So at the end of the day, you can turn around and say, the world is a better place because I woke up this morning.
Yeah, and Wes, can I say when you use that word power, I think it's just so important. Can we emphasize what you're saying so much? Because I think it's overlooked. Because I have a friend who's a school teacher, and she called me up. You know, this is pre-COVID times, and it was last August, and she was setting up her classroom, and she was in such a good mood. It was her third year as a school teacher, and she called me up. She said, Liz, I kind of slipped the last 2 years. I was a bit disconnected. This year, I'm going to make a real difference. I said, what? She said, I'm going to make a difference this year. And I laughed at her. And then she said, what are you laughing at me? You work with kids. I said, hun, I hate to tell you, but you made a difference the last 2 years. You know, whether or not you were rolling your eyes or sucking your teeth or disconnected. I think maybe when you think you're going to decide to make a difference, you've already missed the point. The question rather is, what difference are you making? Because you are making a difference at all times. When you are eye contact, the joy that you bring into a room, right? People will grow into the conversations that you create around them. And you're doing that every single day. And that is a power we overlook. I'm so glad you brought up that word, because I think that we think we can turn it on or turn it off. You know, I'm going to do it today. Actually, you're already doing it. The question is, what difference are you making?
It's true. Like, I'm going to piggyback all that. Like, even when I'm in the ER and I don't have a student, but I see a young person with a parent or an aunt or an uncle, I'm like, hey, what grade are you in? What are you doing? I engage them. I say, what's going on with you? Are you working? Where you going to school? What do you want to be when you grow up? You know, or if they ask a question, I'm like, hey, that's a great question. See, you're a smart person. Are you in school? And I just engage them and try to, because you don't know the power you have, that they go, oh, I heard. We forget of who we are and what we do and say, you know, that kid is going to say, a doctor told me I was smart. You know, they could run with that. You don't know the power we have, you know, in all of our professions. And, you know, I respect all of you, know how much power we have just by asking a question. You know, I went to the gym one day and this girl she was at the cashier, right, at the gym. And she looked at me, she goes, you always walk in here with a book. What are you reading? I engaged her and I said, whoa, why do you care what I'm reading? And we started talking and she goes, I don't know. I think I want to be a doctor, but there's no way because my past really stinks. And she just started going on how she messed up and she thinks it's too late. And, you know, that one question led to so much. And I got her, you know, invited her into the program and she came. So, you know, you never know where you're going to meet a student that you can impact their life, you know.
So one of the things that you guys have all talked about that has been a really powerful theme through this is power and choice and wanting to engage with the young people that we talk about. In our study, many of the teachers expressed that they would like to make connections to resources and supports for kids experiencing housing-related challenges, but they run up against barriers. And some of those barriers were really consistent. And the one that caught my eye in particular was concerns around stigma, that many teachers try to make connections and educators try to make connections, but the student or the family is concerned about the stigma associated with asking for help and receiving help. So I'm wondering, Dr. Mary, can you kick us off with a conversation about how can we help to create a pathway that mitigates social stigma and fears so that people are willing to ask for help when they need it?
Well, like I think the mentorship program kind of thing really helps. Like, you know, if we could have a situation where families who are suffering, you know, from homelessness or difficulty paying the rent and things like that, that we have like a group, you know, like, you know, they have bereavement groups, but then we could have, you know, people who are having a problem with housing, and maybe we could set up some sort of mentorship program where, let's just say, you know, someone who was homeless, who made it, and then they come back and tell their success stories. So create like, you know, a group or a meeting place, maybe once a month, and where people could come together and share their experiences, their hope, and, you know, have a speaker of the night, you know, saying, hey, you know, I was there too, and look where I'm at today. And maybe have a hotline where people don't have to say their name and find out information. You know, maybe send out flyers, you know, there are different times of the year with information. Just kind of just opening the door for them to ask questions and not be afraid, and remind them that, you know, poverty is not a crime and that their family unit will not be broken up. But really just, it's kind of what she was talking about bringing people together in that common need. It's like a wartime. They're struggling together, and, you know, and then you tell them, look, we're going to help you, but you're going to give back, and kind of give them a purpose, and tell them that service is what's going to get them out of this too. It's community, it's service, it's mentorship.
I believe there's a structural piece that can be supportive of exactly the points you're saying. It is that, and I think I want to bring back the vulnerability piece that you were mentioning, because I think it's so powerful. And part of that is just being able to relate to a person and believe that you see yourself in them, and they see like you see yourselves in one another. There's a structural piece, right? So at the Arthur Project, we're based in 2 schools in the Bronx. We were having trouble with offering some extended services, not because, you know, we had great services, but who would take us up on the offer and who was going to come forward and self-identify. And one thing that we found was that maybe we were overlooking that prior to offering those services, what we should be doing is we should have parents of our program and parents in our schools more engaged with our program, that they should already, prior to offering something, have some voice, input, decision-making power, perhaps sit on the board, and that there should be a network of them, like really people from the community need to have power and voice within the systems that are offering these interventions. And what we saw was that when we had people who are we coming into a community? Look, I'm from the Bronx, but I'm not from that neighborhood in the Bronx. And any New Yorker will tell you it's different. You know, what train stop are you near? What block are you on? Like it's really particular. So if you go into the community and you organize within the community to say, is it a little weird for us to be here if people from the community don't also have power here? And so if you put people in power in these positions and you look at yourself as not like giving an intervention, but rather partnering with. So we were able to bring in some parents, and you know what? People then took the interventions because it was one parent to another. Hey, hon, come here. Let's talk for a minute. You know me from the block. Did you know that there's this service here and I have something for you, and it worked for this other parent who's here and you know her too?
Right.
And so then you find that that barrier just comes down. And I think that when you think about how to implement that structurally, you have to think about who is getting decision-making rights and who has power in organizations. If you control for that, then this problem you see a rapid decrease is my sense of things.
I think that is such an important point, and it's a really important point to think through this idea of structures. Because if you want people to believe in what we're telling them, we have to give them a reason to believe it. Oftentimes when we're talking about people who are growing up in poverty, and oftentimes even deep states of poverty, generational poverty, predictable poverty, you're talking about something where the only consistency that people have in their life is inconsistency, right? Everything changes, and it changes rapidly. And everything from where I'm sleeping to where my bills are coming from, to who my teachers are, to everything, right? And so we have to make sure, and when we're talking about systems, this is also just about how to reinforce the fact that individual good deeds is not going to be enough. We actually have to alter systems to be able to make sure that if we're asking people to believe in offerings or believe in supports or believe what this person is telling them, we have to make sure that you're giving them a reason to believe and to know that that dream will actually be heard and honored, and not just continue to be this very cyclical, sick joke about my ability to be able to move and change the destiny of my life, and give it something where that actually feels real and not something that sounds almost comical. And so it really is about being able to understand all the various systems that we have in place and structures, understand the interconnectedness of all of them, that you can't have a build out of one and have one that's faulty, because that faulty system will be the complete breakdown of something else. Understand how these, how laws actually do matter. Oftentimes laws that people don't even know that are on the books. And you don't have to look much further than laws within housing and housing disparities, and who gets access to housing, who doesn't get access to housing, who gets access to public housing, who doesn't get access to public housing, what are the disqualifiers, to know that we have got to have a better coordinated system when it comes to being able to support individuals and families as well.
Amen.
I found out that when you're actually telling people a scenario of how they're about to survive in this world and housing and poverty, is I told him, if you were drowning in just a regular water, just say a pool, you would think you're drowning because of all kind of fears and doubts and everything else. I said, when you're in water, you don't drown because you're afraid. You drown because you never learn how to swim. And that's the problem in our community. They never engage, so they're not informed. So us is like, when I give the example of people in poverty in the project housing that I grew up in, I said, if it flood right now, are you ready to survive and swim out of this flood? They're like, no. Well, I said, there's always a flood coming. It's like it's a storm. It's always a storm coming. Are you prepared? And they all look at me and say, no, I'm really not. And that's a generational curse. Like what I said, it's just been passed down for generations that nobody's teaching each other how to swim. It's that simple. Teach us how to swim, and us as a community, we have to go and learn. So like you said, Liz and Mary Jane, we have to just put it in the systems, and we have to make sure it stays in the system and it's put there, and the community has to do it. It's no other way. The only way, so basically what I do is my foundation is, the only way I give kids free items like clothes, shoes, back to school, they have to go do something in the community, clean it up. They have to do something in their parents' house, make their parents' bed up. Doesn't cost a dime to be kind, and you don't have to have an IQ or a college degree to help someone else out. That's it. But now it's a habit. Now these kids say, hey, Derek, coach, I did this. I cleaned up my neighborhood. I made my sister's bed. I took the trash out without anybody asking. Now guess what they're doing? It's a habit to them now. They're like, okay, well, I'm just used to doing it. And that's what we have to make the community. It has to be a habit to where they have to do it in the sense that, hey, every first of the month, if you're getting a check, you have to come to the school to get your check. That's where the check is at. You're going to have to take this class in order to get your check. If we put stipulations on it and stop just giving money away, and then they're having their open hand, like just here, give them a tangible, say, hey, to get your check, come to the program. That's it. Like, you have to put things in order to make sure that they're ready to learn how to swim before they get in this water.
So each one of you has talked about, in one way or another, giving back to the community or staying connected to the community and being really engaged with sort of where you came from. And it will sort of close out the conversation. The theme for this year's symposium is growing up and out of poverty, but it doesn't say growing up and out of the neighborhood. How do we talk about growing out of poverty while staying connected to the neighborhoods where people live and work? How do we, ensure that people are experiencing that type of economic and social mobility while being able to stay and live in the places where their friends are, where their homes are, where their families are?
Listen, I feel very strongly about this because I was, people, again, I'm known as this homeless to Harvard person. I was homeless, I went to Harvard, and I realized at some point I had internalized a very toxic narrative about where I had come from. People would talk to me about escape. You got to get out of here. You got to run, right? And I understand why. It's not about blame, but there are gifts in where we come from. And where we come from is filled with beauty and assets. And we need to the first thing we need to do is shift the narrative away from, it's all about at risk, right? But, we scan for the risks that kids are up against. We need to scan for the assets and where they come from. And being able to say, I'll give you a concrete example. I was involved in a program in which a child showed up late and was absent very regularly. And the program was about teaching responsibility and leadership, right? And we're like, well, the kid, can he stay in the program? Can he not? And when we sat down, because we had developed and valued relationships, we sat down and was able to just chat with this kid. And we learned that he was late because he was in a household where if his mother had to work a double shift, he had to give his grandmother insulin and take his younger siblings to school. Now, here I was, right, around a table with folks who were saying, well, if he can't show leadership and be here on time, if that child wasn't showing leadership and responsibility more so than some of the adults in the room, I don't know who was. So I think the first thing is we need to acknowledge that it's not just about a black hole that people are coming up out of, that actually there are vibrant and beautiful qualities and traits in our communities. And I decided I wanted to go back to the Bronx and sort of invest in what had created the person that I am. And I think it's really, that's the narrative piece. And then structurally, I believe what we need to do is to start valuing the perspectives of people who are living in the situations in which we intervene. And then what you can start to see is that we can integrate structures of power, such as institutions of education, places, think tanks for policy. You need to give opportunities to people from the community inside of there and let people, if they choose to and if they wish to, remain in their communities and build on the strengths of what we have. I think it's going to be, I think more than anything, we have to think about how to do that on boards. In nonprofits, we need to think about how to do that in, foundations that grant funding and any place in which decisions and power are made. I think if you give access to folks and really, again, truly structurally value their perspectives and find ways for partnership, we'll find it to be less and less the case that people feel that they need to differentiate and escape where they come from in order to leap into somewhere else. But those worlds can actually be bridged and brought together.
I really admire the three of you because you all have like these outreach programs. I don't have any of that. I'm the outreach program. Like I go to the, I go to the local Bronx gym. I take salsa lessons in the Bronx, and then I meet people. Hey, I have a kid. My son's in high school. What do you think? Bah, 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 bah. And then I give them, information, where I get my haircuts in the Bronx, right? And the woman who cuts my hair started telling me about her daughter. I got her in the mentoring and medicine program. So like part of it is staying, for me, is going back into my old community. I live in Westchester County, but I'm very much in the Bronx a lot. And, another place is when I did the CVS program, Bravery and Hope, my high school started writing me letters, all these students, and someone said, oh, just write a global thank you. And I said, no, that child wrote me a letter and she's going to get a response from me, a paragraph from me, to inspire that student and thank them for thinking of me and all my coworkers on the front line. It's important to engage with them one-on-one. I'm able to do that. You guys have a different gift than me, and you guys have all the organizations, and I'm like so proud to hear that, and it moves and touches me. But I do what I can, and sometimes it is just that one-on-one. And for me, it's going back into my own community physically. I still visit my high school and give talks, and just engaging within my neighborhood.
Yeah, I'd say when we talk about what it means to lift up and move up, and does that necessarily mean move out? You know, I think about it in context of neighborhoods, and people say, well, what do those neighborhoods need? We know the answer because we see what affluent neighborhoods have. Mm-hmm. We see what neighborhoods where these things aren't issues. We see what they have. So the idea of saying that we somehow are like scratching our heads to figure out what neighborhoods need is just, it's absurd. You know, you need good public transportation that can move people from where they are and where they live and where they can work. You need to have good quality schools inside of areas where we're investing in teachers and principals and infrastructure. You need to be able to have community organizations and community centers around where you have places where kids feel safe in order to learn and grow and support each other. You cannot have places that are in food deserts and places where you're not getting any forms of real nourishment for that child besides corner stores. You know, so we know so many of the things that deal with issues of education, mental health, physical health, transportation, housing as a human right. We know the things that are necessary in order to create measures of economic mobility and measures of real societal lift so that people don't have to feel like the exceptions in order to make it. Or that the first answer has to be, well, as soon as I get what I need to get, I'm out. How can we then come up with a new way of investing in neighborhoods and investing in families and investing in children that then turn around to have a larger societal impact on the type of communities we're trying to actually exist in?
I could just throw all you guys' conversations together and just push repeat. So, so I agree. And again, people say, what can, maybe if I save one child, I was one of those children that got saved and I feed 1,000 people every month. Imagine if we had 10 more of me.
Right.
Just imagine. So if one person can do it,
Right.
like just imagine if you just actually cared enough to just stay in that environment and teach. Doesn't mean you have to have a degree. None of us had a degree in being polite. It needs to be taught. It needs to be shared. It needs to be instructed all throughout your life from every angle that we walk in. You know, if you get on the bus, say hello. You know, that public service person is happy to open the door. He's happy to wait. He's happy to help the kid who's giving his grandma insulin. He's happy to wait an extra 5 minutes, and everybody on the bus is okay because they know this kid's always a little 5 minutes late. That kind of kindness and generosity, it breathes into the community. It's like anything else. Whatever you see more of is what we become. So I think if we continue to push the envelope for decompressing in adults, decompressing in kids, and having one community that just teaches human kindness, your mindset will change. It'll change your outcome of everyday living. You won't even compare yourself to having a pair of Jordans as compared to a $9 pair of shoes. You're not thinking about what the person's wearing. You're remembering how they made you feel. You remember the environment you're in. You remember how much fun you had. You can remember, all you guys can remember the time you had the greatest times of your life. You can say, I remember I was on vacation, but I guarantee you don't remember what you had on. You don't care. You care about how you felt. You care about what you were doing in your moment. And I think for us in the public housing and in the school systems, everywhere across the world, the more we teach to decompress and to be humankind, human people, and being in human kindness all the time, your mentality changes. Right now, if all of us have changed our mindset, we're in a happy mood right now. It could take one bad person driving bad to us, and it'll throw us completely off. But if you continue to teach your mind, don't get mad at the bad drivers, don't get mad at this. Now your mindset becomes immune to it, and you stay focused on the contact at hand is that I have to stay strong, and knowing that I have to help someone else out be as nice as I can be. And that implements our system and we become better as humans.
I just want to say thank you so much. This was really an inspiring conversation. And on behalf of the NHP Foundation and everybody here at tonight's event, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing with us all. And we really appreciate the four of you and the work that you're doing on a daily basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, everybody.
Everything is okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
This is not an end of the conversation. It is only a beginning. Our participants today confirmed much of what our research has told us. Students, families, and educators are all impacted by housing-related challenges. Today's conversation also helped us envision a critical first step towards mitigating these challenges, now during COVID-19 and for the years to come. Through the work we all do, both professionally and in our personal lives, we can begin by striving to ensure that all voices are heard. Parents, students, teachers, and service providers, in a welcoming, nurturing environment where everyone is free to express their needs without fear or humiliation, where the professionals are trained to spot and overcome barriers to support the children and families in need, and can trust and partner with them to improve their lives. In the coming weeks, we will produce a white paper exploring the survey findings and encompassing recommendations that our industry and society at large can implement for a brighter future for America's families.